All businesses solve problem sets. We think those that solve more meaningful and impactful problem sets will be valued more by the market over time. But that's what will kind of lead to the shift. The long term matters way more than the short term, and family and health and wellness and balance and groundedness and spirituality. Giving space for that is the only thing that's going to allow us, I think, to succeed in the long term. And so it's part of about repurposing capitalism is looking at the how. It is all interconnected.
Welcome. It's great to have you here for this inspiring conversation. We are now on week 3 of our course From Me to We. You are still welcome to join us or join for the individual speaker sessions. We had a powerful week exploring the theme of We Are All Entangled. And now we journey on into collective Dharma with our guests Claire Dubois, Erin Dixon, and Uma Dinsmore-Tooley joining us on Monday. We will be exploring these questions. How do we deepen our understanding of Dharma from an individual soul focus to a collective inquiry that honors and celebrates both our diversity and interconnectedness and calls for collective liberation and prosperity? How can we dismantle our privilege and notions of white saviorism while still showing up for issues such as climate breakdown, which have less impact where there is more wealth? For more information on From Me to We, head to allthatweare.org. Our guest today is Daniel Epstein, whose unfettered belief in entrepreneurs led him to found and become the CEO of Unreasonable Group, an organization dedicated to supporting an international fellowship for growth stage entrepreneurs who are profitably solving global issues. Today, Unreasonable actively supports over 310 growth stage CEOs, channels exclusive deal flow to hundreds of investors and investment funds, and partners with multinational brands and institutions to discover profit in solving global challenges. Via the Unreasonable Collective, Daniel and his team also give a diverse community of individuals the ability to invest into ventures operating at the intersection of impact advanced technologies. Recently, Daniel was named by Fortune magazine as one of the world's 50 greatest leaders, alongside the likes of Bill Gates and Tim Cook. Daniel was also awarded Inc. magazine's 30 Under 30 Entrepreneurs, and Forbes identified him as one of the top 30 most impactful entrepreneurs. He also received the prestigious Entrepreneur of the World Award, along with Richard Branson and the president of Liberia at the Global Entrepreneurship Forum. Beyond his capacities at Unreasonable, Daniel is a frequent keynote speaker, moderator, thought leader, and advisor. In this conversation entitled Alchemists of the Future, we explore the themes of repurposing capitalism, intuition, and meaningful entrepreneurship, where we speak to the question, how do we repurpose capitalism to create an inclusive and regenerative future? I hope that you enjoy this conversation and it opens possibilities within you. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration. The spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. Daniel, it is a joy to welcome you to All That We Are. Thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a privilege, and I'm looking forward to kind of kicking off my day with this conversation.
I would love for you to share, what are the futures of your wildest dreams?
Wow, we are going straight into it. If there was this is going to be kind of strong language, but if there was a disease of our time, I think it would be a lack of connection. And I think it's something that, people everywhere are starving for. That's a disconnect in a lot of ways, not just from each other and our neighbors, from ourselves, from the land, from our heritage, from our food, from the products that we buy. What I would love to see in a future is one that is connected to all of those things. It's what we're designed for. It's why it feels so good to be connected, whether that is in nature, or that's in community, or it's with the person you're having a conversation with, or with your dog, or whatever that might be. But I hope we have a world where we can get back to that. I look at the state of the world, and I always like tools. Technology is just a tool. So obviously, what we're using right now is a great tool. But a hammer is also a tool that can be used to build a house or destroy a home. It's all about the consciousness of the person wielding the hammer. And I think that as technology is on an exponential growth curve in terms of its power, right, and its potential output, it's a lot more powerful than a hammer right now. I think we're in a lot of trouble if human consciousness can't catch up with the rate of change, transformation in technology. And I think that the way we'll do that is through connection. So I would hope we get back to our natural selves and find a future where we're much more connected, both to one another, ourselves, and the environment. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it absolutely makes sense. And it's something that I spend a lot of time contemplating and longing for. I feel like so many of us long for connection in all these ways, and for life to not be as hard as it is. Why do we
overcomplicate it?
Yeah, why is it so hard to eat real food?
Totally. Well, it doesn't need to be, but there's a lot of inertia, and inertia is a hard thing to break free of, I think, mentally. But once you do it, you're like, oh, hang on, it's actually not that hard. But there's a lot of inertia out there.
Yeah, well, and as well as inertia, when you go into a store, a lot of the things that you see are not the real food. A lot of it is new food, new foods that have been created and that have very low nutritional content. And so it's all of these things we kind of have to juggle and
totally
and find our way through. And
yeah,
one of the things that we've been contemplating recently, because we're currently doing this learning journey with some of the community of All That We Are called From Me to We. And one big aspect of it is that we are in late stage capitalism. Within that system, it's hard. And we find ourselves in this time where so much doesn't make sense in how it's kind of created and given to us.
Yeah, there's an absurdity. It's that's where we landed?
Yeah, it's bonkers. It's
totally.
Every day, our lives are taken up by things that take up time that are completely bonkers. Whether it's wrestling with a company because some service was not provided correctly, and then you have to go through all these hoops and different AI bots to get to somebody that can actually help you with the problem. And we're kind of in this space where there's that humanness has been taken out of a lot of our kind of day-to-day. And we have to kind of do all these things that we know that don't really, really make sense. That this is a lot to do with where we're at with capitalism as a system. And you talk about repurposing capitalism. And I would love for you to share
what
with
does
us.
that mean?
What does it mean? How do you do it?
Well, it gets actually back to the idea of a tool. I think capitalism is a tool. Now, for better or worse, and I would easily argue for worse, capitalism is the most powerful tool of our time. And if we're honest, policy is very powerful, but what guides policy? And in at least places like the US, the private sector interest on what we do as a government is very powerful. And it's kind of like the tail that wags the dog in essence. And so we have this immensely powerful system called capitalism, capital markets, or private enterprise. And just like the hammer, it could be used to build a house or destroy a home. Capitalism can be extractive incredibly, which is a lot of the reason why we are in the challenges that we face today. But our question is, how do we wield this, incredibly powerful tool to, instead of creating an extractive and exclusive future, create an inclusive and regenerative future. What we're saying is the tool's very efficient. It has a lot of efficiencies baked into it. So the tool isn't the problem, it's how we use it. And so our question that we're constantly exploring is, how do we lever it to create this better future? And the way to do that is to show within the system that you can. Right. So for us, it's about showing that the companies that will outperform in the future are companies that are focused on inclusivity and regeneration and sustainability. And they will outperform the financial markets, and therefore the markets will kind of orient in that direction. It's a long game. It's not necessarily an easy one, kind of to your point, but I think it's a remarkably important experiment. I think most of the world believes that doing good and doing well are on opposite ends of the spectrum. Doing good, having a positive impact on society and the planet, and doing well, making a lot of money, right? So you kind of have the nonprofit and the for-profit world, the public and the private sector. And I think anybody would agree, if you really think about it, that it's not a linear line, that it's actually a two-dimensional axis, right? And if we pretend on the x-axis, we have, let's say, doing good. So the farther to the right, the more good you're doing in the world. And then on the y-axis, we have doing well. So the higher up you go, the more financial returns you're creating. Our belief is that it's not just that you can do good by doing well, that you're in that kind of quadrant, the top right, but that actually the future of businesses, the most lucrative businesses, will be those that are solving humanity's most pressing challenges. Because at the end of the day, all businesses solve problem sets. We think those that solve more meaningful and impactful problem sets will be valued more by the market over time. And that's what will kind of lead to the shift. Maybe I'll say one more thing here, because we're not the first ones that obviously think this. And the reason we say repurpose capitalism, integrate a different purpose into it, part of it is about going back to the start. And so Adam Smith, the philosopher, he had two seminal papers in his life. Right? One is what everybody talks about, which is The Wealth of Nations, which is in a lot of ways the founding premise for capitalism. But the one that he wrote before that was called The Theory on Moral Sentiment. And the reason he wrote The Wealth of Nations, and in essence came up with this modern capitalist kind of theory, was he believed that that was the way to have the most moral and just society. And we lost track of that, right? And so we got to bring this capitalism back to its foundational intention, which is morality. We hope to play a small part in kind of catalyzing that shift back to what the founding intention really was.
Yeah, because I don't feel like we're witnessing that invisible hand.
That invisible hand sucks right now.
Yeah.
It's not doing great things.
So I want to disrupt your axis a little bit, because you've got doing good and doing well. And I'm wondering where being well also fits into that. Because I am very connected to a lot of social entrepreneurs. And what I find is that the tendency still is there to burn out. I've been there several times myself. I know sort of social entrepreneurs that hire mostly young men that aren't going to stop to have babies, that are going to work late, to have families. And so there's a disconnect from what makes a society well, and also what brings that whole kind of meaning of life alive.
Yeah, it's a big thing that we actually support our entrepreneurs in. So we support about 350 CEOs as part of the Unreasonable Fellowship. And that's the heart of what we do at Unreasonable Group, is we find these CEOs who we believe are playing a pivotal role in creating the future that we want to see, a more just future, just in terms of environment, social and equitable. And then we try to give them everything that we possibly can to give them this kind of collaborative advantage so they have more impact in the future. A big part of what we do, though, is around wellness. I think it's a myth that needs to get busted, which is, it's a very masculine kind of myth. And the myth is, if I just kind of stick my head down and almost kill myself doing this work, that's the only way I'm going to kind of manifest this vision in the world. And that is a story that loves to be told. And so culturally, it's been adopted by a lot of people, but I don't think it's necessarily true at all in that sense. And maybe in the short term, if somebody really wants to move something quickly, you can go heads down and do that. And in some ways that's okay. But if you're in the long-term game, that plan will fizzle out or it will crash and burn at some point.
Normally quite dramatically, guts spewing over everyone.
So it's kind of, what are the values that govern how you want to grow your company as an entrepreneur? And I think that the how matters as much as the what, which gets kind of to your point. When I first started, I was much more that naive kind of heads down. I was proud at the time, and I'm not proud in hindsight, of 18-hour days, 7 days a week, eating baby food for nutrition, polyphasic sleeping, not having a life outside of it. And it wasn't that I was proud of it. It was actually that I was obsessed. Would be the real way, that I couldn't stop. I actually loved it so much. But then I realized that strategy doesn't work in a longer term game. And so what is the goal of what you're trying to achieve in the world? Ours is, I hope Unreasonable exists for hundreds of years if we're successful in our purpose, which is helping scale promising solutions to our most meaningful problems. We'll always have meaningful problems or challenges. If we're looking at, let's just say, 100-year company, then the long term matters way more than the short term, and family and health and wellness and balance and groundedness and spirituality. Giving space for that is the only thing that's going to allow us, I think, to succeed in the long term. And so it's part of about repurposing capitalism is looking at the how. That's not just the demographics of your team. That is also, hopefully, your teammates' ability to thrive in life as well as work, and in life even more so, ideally, because of work. Now that's a really idealistic statement, and we're not there yet, but that is a big part of bringing purpose back into capitalism. I think it has to be, or else we'll miss it. We'll get excited by these really innovative solutions, and we'll end up right where we are at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's challenging when you really care about something, and also when you're trying to do something that hasn't been done before. You do have to put a lot into it, and you don't always have the resources around you in order to stop at 5 p.m. and put your feet up.
And I think that works for chapters, but also we have a lot to learn from looking at nature. Like, there's seasonality to nature for a reason, right? And I think that works. There are seasons. It's an introspective question to check in with where your energy levels are at, and to really ask you, like, am I experiencing joy right now from whatever that is, in life and in work? And if the answer is actually no, I'm exhausted, or I'm not showing up well as a wife or a husband or a friend or a daughter or a son or whatever that is, then it's a really important time to pay attention to that and say, oh, maybe I'm in a different season. I need a reposture. Most of these startups that are really trying to solve really hard problems that haven't been solved before, they have a period where they're full on, but they're getting huge amounts of joy from that. And I think that's great. But then it's just important to really pay attention to what is your energy and what is your posture really. And, do you continue down that, or is that just a chapter? And then there's the next chapter of the organization.
Yeah, totally. So I'm curious to know some of the examples of enterprises that you're really excited about that are repurposing capitalism in exciting ways, and that are able to tap into some of these issues.
Oh, there's so many. I mean, honestly, there are so many. So I could tell you the story of any one of the 350 fellows, but I'll start with Jennifer Holgrim. The company that she runs is called Lanza Tech. She actually lives part-time in Colorado, which is where I am right now. So close to home. She's an amazing entrepreneur and CEO, and but her background's in biotech. And she had actually retired as an executive. I decided to move into the hills of Colorado, in this town called Leadville, which has the highest post office in the United States. It's a small mountain town far back in the hills. And then, as she tells the story, she got a call from a scientist in New Zealand who had a technology that she couldn't turn away from, and kind of felt that calling to come back into it. And in essence, what Lanza Tech does is they're able to almost like bioengineer microbes that can eat pollution and turn it into fuel, would be the way to think about it. So it's amazing technology. It's in essence fermentation of pollution, would be an easy way to think about it. So similar to beer, right? Beer is yeast, microbes, water, and sugar, and then that ferments into a new product. But it's because of the microbes, the yeast. In this case, when we started working with them, they had a pilot program in Guangzhou in China where they're working with a steel refinery, and where the smokestack is that would normally emit methane, carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Instead of that actually going up into the air, it goes into a pipe that comes down into a tank. It looks exactly like a beer fermentation tank. They have these bacteria that they've engineered, in essence, that would eat it and turn it into ethanol, polyethylene as well. ethanol can be converted into jet fuel, as well as into polyethylene, which is plastic. And so they were proving out that you could capture pollution, turn it into something valuable, and create things like jet fuel or polyester fabric shoes, whatever that might be. But it was very early stage. Since then, they've really scaled. They're actually about to go public. It's over $2 billion valuation of the company. Virgin Atlantic, this was maybe 4 years ago, flew its first airliner, commercial airliner across the Atlantic that was powered on jet fuel made out of pollution. So it's recycled carbon from their technology. Now, United Airlines is now flying cross-continentally on recycled pollution. In essence, I was really excited, Jennifer's work. They partnered with one of the companies in the fellowship called 12. It was actually our partners at Barclays funded their ability to collaborate, to start that collaboration. And they're now launching clothing lines and shoe lines that are made out of pollution, literally, because at the end of the day, it's all carbon. The impact on the environment is really magnificent. Each steel mill or oil refinery that they partner with, they stop those emissions into the atmosphere. So that's the equivalent of taking about 88,000 cars off the road every year for each partnership that they have. And the payback period to these large steel mills or oil refineries is about 2.5 years, which means within 2.5 years, now they're profiting off of their pollution, off of capturing it and turning it into something valuable. The only waste product from this process is fertilizer. That's entirely organic fertilizer. It's the shells of the bacteria. It's a great example of a type of company that seems like science fiction, but it's nonfiction. They're alchemists, right? They're recycling pollution and turning it into value, and therefore recycling carbon. So that'd be a good example of a phenomenal entrepreneur and business. Maybe another one, we were just emailing, which is why it comes to mind, but David is the entrepreneur, and his company's called Aerofarms. If you look at urban environments, food deserts are very real. Yeah, access to healthy, fresh produce is, in some places, seems impossible. Aerofarms is the largest indoor hydroponic farm in the world. The efficiency it's like mind blowing. So they are over 390 times more efficient than traditional agriculture without the use of soil or sunlight. What that means is what would take 390 acres, they can do in 1 acre of production. And these are in cities. So they'll take over old abandoned industrial buildings. They'll provide jobs to the local community. And they are driving incredibly nutritious, not engineered in any way, incredibly nutritious produce in cities. That's an important aspect as we look at kind of future food systems within urban environments. But then we also work with companies like Terramera out of Canada that is finding ways to create pesticides for farms that are actually act like probiotics for the soil that you could, as a human, drink straight out of the bottle. It's insane. If you think about, and this is true in the US at least, I'm wondering if it's true in the UK, but when I was a kid, we used to have road trips as a family. And it would be really gross, your windshield, right? It'd be covered in bugs. Like would have to pull over at a gas station and wipe it off. I had a friend ask me 2 years ago, they said, when you drive, what does your windshield look like nowadays? I was like, it's clean. There's no bugs anymore. And that is all because of pesticides. We have killed over 85% of the insects in the United States. That is such a detrimental impact on broader ecosystems. Also, the pesticides that we use were neurotoxins that were developed in Vietnam to kill people. So they're poisonous to humans. You will die if you drink these things, and they get into our water systems and they kill the soil as well. And so this company, Terramera, was using a nanotechnology to, in essence, make neem, which is an entirely natural product that's actually huge health benefits, be able to turn neem into a pesticide that, once again, acts like probiotics for the soil, leads to much healthier farmlands and does not wipe out insect populations like what we currently use, and is good for humans. So there's a couple examples, but there's hundreds more.
That could be game changing for India, where we have all the farmer suicides and the whole pesticide story is completely woven into that.
It's all interwoven everywhere. Yeah. So Karn is Indian by heritage. He was actually the youngest member of parliament in Canada. His only mission is to try to bring more meaning into the lives of people around the world. And he realized to do that, he's got to work on, in his case, farming and pesticides in general, because it's all connected, to your point.
And soil life in general is running out. Like, it's very limited. And we don't really talk about that enough.
No, not even close. Right. So we have those types of companies. We have other companies that are using drones to autonomously try to plant 1 trillion trees in the next a couple decades. Companies looking at ocean health and coral reefs, but we also look just at the human side, which is future medicine, future of healthcare access, education, learning, job training, and kind of all of that. because at the end of the day, it is all interconnected. There is no panacea solution. We cannot tackle poverty on its own. We cannot tackle climate change on its own. It's all part of a broader system. And so that's why we have this really large kind of community approach towards having a broader shift in the right direction. Because if we just pull on one of those areas, we kind of fail from the start. In the long term, in the short term, it might be really satisfying. But
what do you think it is that makes somebody able to take that spark of inspiration about what they want to create in the world and actually make it happen?
Let me try to answer that. We're gonna explore that. We also have to acknowledge that type of conversation as well, that although many of our entrepreneurs are not at all, but if you look at the broad trend lines in entrepreneurship, privilege is a huge part of what gives someone the ability to do that. That doesn't mean that everyone who is privileged, but that statistically helps immensely. So the income and education of your parents is a huge part of that. You can look at gender and race dynamics and venture capital, everything else. It's about 2.5% of funding in the US went to women CEOs last year. That's like insanely disproportional and egregious. And if you layer onto that either First Nation or Indigenous or Native American in our case, or if you look at racial dynamics, you are much more likely to succeed if you look like me. Right? A white male, and both my parents are educated, had a great upbringing, and so on and so forth. So that's part of it. But if we put that aside, which is a big aside, we say, what are the kind of characteristics almost of someone who can see a problem, identify a solution, and then will it into existence? I think in some ways it's rare. I think there's no shortage of brilliant ideas in the world. Everybody has them all the time. I think there isn't really a shortage of capital. For some people, there's not fair access to capital, but there's a huge amount of investment right now on the sidelines. I think what there is a dearth of is courage, and that it takes a very strange type of human, right, to dedicate their life's work towards solving a problem that hasn't been solved, oftentimes in markets that people don't consider to be markets, with products that people didn't know existed. It is a hard path to walk, remarkably hard. I believe it takes an obsession with the challenge or the problem. There's a deep inner drive, a belief that I can't live with this absurdity, kind of to your point earlier of how things are currently functioning. I need to change that. And I think that comes from a very deep place to be able to do the type of work our entrepreneurs do. And so they find something that gets them out of bed every single morning. And this obsession with solving the problem and finding so much meaning in that is probably the only thing that would give at least the entrepreneurs that we support, the ability to go through the roller coaster of trying to start these companies, because it is very hard work. But if you love the cause so much, it can actually be really joyful work. And I think burnout is actually, from what I've seen, at least, much more common in entrepreneurs that are not aligned with their mission at the end of the day, because at some point they ask themselves, well, why am I actually doing this? And I think getting really clear on the why is a super important motivator.
I'm curious if that's true about burnout, just because I know a huge amount of people, and women in particular, that burn out. And I wonder if that's more to do with not accessing the support to get things to the next level. And so maybe getting stuck at the same level, stuck in the chapter.
You're actually so right, because the difference with the entrepreneurs that we support is we wrap them with a community of support for life. And I think actually making that journey less lonely is what can give somebody that type of heart-forward support, as well as material support, is what can probably give somebody the ability to not hit that wall in the same way. I think you're right, Amisha, actually.
It sounds so good, Daniel. I want to be wrapped in a support for the rest of my life.
Me too. That's why we started it. Once an entrepreneur's in the fellowship, we support them for life into perpetuity. We never charge them anything for that support. We see it as our sole job, is to have this community of support. And that's everything. That's, you might be struggling with, balancing showing up for your family well and showing up well as a CEO. We can connect you to relationship psychologists and coaches in that sense. You might be struggling with cross-continental supply chain between India and East Africa for a distributed solar company. And, we can connect to a ton of resources there. Whatever that might be, it's any need we're trying to support. Because if these entrepreneurs realize their potential, they're painting the picture of the future that we really want to see. And so we just try to do everything we can to help those on the front lines who are actually doing the like noble hard work in that sense.
I love that, because quite often I was in a social entrepreneur incubator with a tech startup that I was a co-founder of and left very burnt out from. It's just raised like 5 million, maybe. It's like in its next stage. But we were in this accelerator and it had those just really horrible lights.
That sounds awful.
That's my main memory, was like, I sat under those lights and we were often there from 8 a.m. till 2 a.m. and it's like under these lights. And I feel like we all went mad. And then you're thrown out of that into something. So I love that you offer this as like a lifelong journey. It's like a real investment in the humans.
Totally. Our programming, which, typically it's that's about a week immersive gathering in person and maybe 7 weeks of virtual community building. Our program is actually the point of induction into the community. And it's once you're actually in the community after the program, in the fellowship, that's when the lifelong support really shows up. And I think that a lot of organizations episodic in that sense, where it's the program is the benefit. Right. And there might be like a pitch event at the end, that type of thing. For us, the program is the start. This gets back to like posturing around kind of future business. And is it this like short-term sprint, or are we trying to, work on our life's work? And it's a very different approach if it's life's work. That's how we're trying to show up, at least for the entrepreneurs we support. We support them in their life's work, not just this season, kind of to get back to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it takes many, many seasons to create something that's going to really change our future.
Mm-hmm.
In your life, you're surrounded by people that are working on all these amazing solutions. Do you ever still get bummed out about what's happening
the state of things
in the world and climate change? And
yeah, I mean, of course, it's a both. I had a friend or a mentor once tell me there are simple truths and profound truths. And a simple truth, the definition is that the opposite is false, right? So you and I are talking right now. That is a simple truth. A profound truth is that the definition of profound truth is the opposite is also a profound truth. And I think that's like the messiness of life is in a paradox. And so I hold both, like huge amount of optimism for what's possible and a lot of, fear and grief for where a lot of things are currently at and what that means, especially in the short term for a lot of people around the world. And I would not say I'm not a pessimist at all, clearly, but I also say I'm not necessarily an optimist. I think if I were to use a word, it would be I'm a possibilist. I believe that either future is possible. We could have a very dystopian future, or we can orient towards a more utopian one. What it's going to take is real intentionality to try to get us to that more optimistic future. So I sit with both, right? I do have huge amounts of excitement when you can look at almost any major challenge or crises that we're facing today, and we're working with an incredible solution oriented around that, and typically dozens of solutions oriented around that. So there is a lot of excitement about what's possible when you see that. But at the same rate, we were talking about Lanza Tech earlier, capturing pollution and recycling carbon in the process. We have companies that are doing that with food. They're making food out of pollution. Air Protein is a great example. Dr. Lisa Dyson's the entrepreneur. She can make meat out of pollution, out of carbon dioxide, because it's all carbon at the end of the day. That's really exciting. But when we're looking at the climate crisis, winning slowly is the same thing as losing. There's no difference between the two. And so that's why, yes, the solutions do exist. We need to get them to kind of global adoption faster to replace the incumbent systems that we have. And if we don't do that, then we kind of fail. And so that's that possibilist kind of side of things. I think I hold both, because also, it's hard not to in the current state of affairs. Right? I'm in Colorado in December. We hadn't had any snowfall, and we had 110 mile per hour winds, and we had a fire that took out 1,500 homes, not in the mountains, but in towns. And that is our new normal.
And that was in the winter.
That was in the winter. Yeah, unheard of. Nothing like we broke lack of precipitation. We broke lack of snowfall records. Every year we're breaking records for the hottest summer. 2 summers ago, we had the largest fire in Colorado history. And then another fire that summer became the largest fire in recorded Colorado history. And then another fire became the largest fire. So in one season, we had 3 fires larger than any in recorded history. So that's kind of our new normal. So that side, the closeness or proximity to the crises that we face is very real. I do think that there is an immense possibility to have a future that feels really different, feels regenerative, feels inclusive, but it's just possible. So we got to play our part and try to get there. And it's both a short and long-term game, right? So impatience and patience are both virtues, kind of getting back to the paradox that we live within it. Because you need patience because it's a 100-year game that we're trying to play. But you also need impatience as well. It can be a virtue in that a lot of these problems are impacting people, obviously, today, right now.
Do you feel in a repurposed version of capitalism, are there still winners and losers? Or are we able to get to a more equitable place?
We have to. And this is probably the hardest thing. And this is where regulation, I actually think, has to play a role, and policy has to play a role. And the dynamics between the private sector and the public sector needs to change, because right now it really is private sector, I think, influencing the public policy. If we had a real democracy, I don't think we would actually be in some of the challenges that we face right now. Sorry, hang on. What was your question? I just went off on a total tangent. I was about to talk about politics. I don't want to do that.
Well, I think it's important actually in this conversation, because if we look at what's happened during the pandemic and those that have made a lot of money and those that have really been squeezed and have really, really struggled, it is the role of government to intervene there and to actually create the right kind of tax and legislation systems in order to make sure that that's not what happens.
That's not what happens. I think it's exactly right. I think the two most prominent crises that we face right now, one is inequity, one is the climate crisis. And they're inextricably tied at the same rate. But to your point, there are 3 people have more wealth than 50% of the country in the US. That is an insane statistic. It is just wild. And I don't think you can have a future where the only thing that is growing as fast as wealth right now in the world is the wealth gap. And at some point that breaks, right? And so how does it break? It either is violent in how it breaks, or proactively we can have changes in policy. And I think that is absolutely critical to the future. And we'll get there either way at some point, because the current system has to break. People will say the system's broken, and it's not broken. It's working insanely well, but it wasn't designed in a way that's actually going to last. And the way that it's going to last is going to become inclusive instead of exclusive in terms of wealth creation. So it has to change. And I think government has a really important role to play in that change. Business unchecked is a little bit of what it's got us to where we are today.
Yeah, and then it all revolves around certain personalities. For any great qualities that they might have, for some reason, many people talk about how they're going to end poverty or how they're going to do that. And, they find out how much it costs. It turns out it's not actually that expensive for the proportion of money that they have. And then it doesn't happen. I'm also curious as to what happens along that journey that stops that from happening.
Yeah. Well, this gets to influence. This is me also speaking with not a lot of exposure into government. But from what I can see at this stage of life, you can give me a magic wand and I could do one thing. I would take out private interests in public policy. I would remove campaign financing or put a cap on it and make certain it's transparent. That'd be the other thing. And then I would remove lobbying, because then I think you would actually get a government that is truly representative and beholden to the voters versus beholden to the people who are financing their ability to convert voters. And I think we would see something much better. That to me it's huge. That's a systems problem that does need to get solved at some level at some time. And once again, it will either happen violently or it could happen kind of proactively. And obviously I'm talking in really broad strokes, and it's probably not as simple as maybe it feels like it should be, but it does seem to be remove private interest funding from public policy. That seems obvious in that sense.
And tax loopholes.
Yeah, of course. Well, that happens because of private sector interest. That's why that happens, is because I can, influence the tax code by putting a lot of financing into policy and into elections.
One of the things that when we were going on this exploration around changing our name this year, we in part realized that saying something like the future is, it felt really out of date, actually. And I, along with my co-creators, were talking about the futures and like the polarity of like what's coming and what's happening, and that it feels a bit naive to kind of imagine, oh, this is the future of this, because there's going to be so many different versions of that for different kinds of people and in different places and of different backgrounds. So I'm really curious around this issue of equity in the future. We talked about it a little bit already, but I just wondered what else is stirring in your heart around that?
I mean, a lot. If we look at equity, once again, everything matters, but education is a huge part of that. Access to education is a huge part of that. And a lot of the ventures that we support are in that world, doing amazing, phenomenal work, whether that's Classcraft or that's Bridge Academy. So Classcraft is one of the larger virtual classrooms in the world. They have about 7 million students, and Bridge Academy is at hundreds of schools across sub-Saharan Africa right now, where for less than $2 a day, you can have really quality education. And so, very different models. That part's important. But if we're talking about equity, you have to look at everything, like the prison systems in the US. We have more people incarcerated than any country per capita on the planet, anywhere. The US will point fingers at Russia and China, but our incarceration system is statistically worse, which is nuts. And recidivism rates are above 80% on felonies. So we have a company called Adovo that is specifically working to change that. They more than cut recidivism rates in half for hundreds of thousands of inmates, but there are millions, right? And so I think that's a part of it, but it's also equity work is more so than anything. It is, I think, about how versus what. So how do companies show up? How do they build their teams? How do they compensate their teams? This is something that as Unreasonable grows, I think we have a role to play in experimenting to figure out how to do it really well and to create a more equitable future. We have things like a 6x salary cap. The minimum salary at Unreasonable, no matter where in the world you're employed, is $75,000. That's the bare minimum, and that's because that's above the median household income in the U.S. We wanted to ensure that people can thrive in the organization, no matter what role, no matter what stage in the company they've joined. Things like that matter. But there's a lot more to be done. Part of that is also learning. So we do track demographics, ethnic and gender demographics, not just of the CEOs we support, but also of their management teams and their boards of directors. And what we hope to show over time is that those that are more inclusive or more equitable and diverse, they're outperforming. But part of that is kind of tracking that and also encouraging our companies to orient in that direction. Most really want to. But a lot of it it's not an issue of talent, it's an issue of access. And so how can we help play a role in that as well? I'm kind of blabbering, but your question's a big one and it's really damned important. And there's so many aspects and angles to it. And I think we need to practice what we preach at Unreasonable, kind of be a case study. I hope that in 5 years from now, we're really looked at for, in that way of, oh, hang on, here's a way where, a company can be doing really well while having a huge amount of impact. That's the only reason we exist. But also is in the how we're doing it, created a more equitable future for our teammates as well.
Where did the spark for Unreasonable come from in you?
Totally selfish. No, it was. There's probably like a lot of little sparks, but for me, it was selfish in that I was an entrepreneur. I had launched 3 startups in university, and I was trying to solve problems typically delegated to the nonprofit world, but with for-profit business models.
So this was after your lawn mowing days?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Far after. Well, I was like 18 is when I started to really work on startups. In that sense, I, remember hanging out with the nonprofit community thinking these are my people, and then feeling like a misfit because I was a capitalist, not in heart, but in mind, right? This belief that profit's a really powerful driver for ingenuity and markets for scale. So if we want to solve problems at scale, unless it's in policy, I think it's helpful at least to have a sustainable economic engine behind it that scales it. And then I'd go to the private sector thinking, well, then these are my people, they get that. And I was actually more of a misfit at that time, because for me, profit is a tool to be levered to have impact at scale. It is not an end in and of itself. And so Unreasonable, I really do mean it, was selfish in the sense that I felt like a misfit and I wanted to seek refuge amongst other misfits. I really wanted a community who spoke the same language and had the same orientation and, was foolhardy enough to believe they can, quote unquote, put a dent on the world's greatest challenges, but was hell-bent and determined to never stop short of that, which meant, in essence, this was their life's work. At that time, I couldn't find a community. If I could have, I would have tried to get into it. I actually had no interest in building it, but because it didn't exist, and then I kind of had to. It wasn't until 2 years into running, really the pilot that later became Unreasonable, that I realized I kind of set my ego aside, and I got addicted to leverage, I would say. And it's not financial, it's impact leverage. And that I realized, I can start 1 or 2 companies in my lifetime if I'm lucky, like really lucky. They might impact maybe tens of millions of lives in a measurably meaningful way. Or we could strive to be an organization that supported a global portfolio of solutions that are already on the front lines doing that work. And if we can help a company that is bringing clean drinking water to 2 million people, bring that to 200 million people faster, that was just so much more impact. In some ways, that was the spark, actually, it was a realization of how powerful it was to have a community of lifelong support for these solutions that are already out in market. That was kind of the calling. I had to feel that, because at first it was too meta, and I didn't want to support entrepreneurs on the front lines. I wanted to be the entrepreneur on the front lines. And then I kind of swallowed my ego and realized they're smarter. and that the unique position I could help create was that community of support for them, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. Yeah. It's something that I contemplate sometimes. I could spend my time like writing more books and doing my own thing. It would be more peaceful.
Yeah.
It would be less difficult in lots of ways. Instead, I spend a lot of time bringing lots of people together, creating community, putting a spotlight on other people's stories and things that they've done and that they're doing. And I do sometimes ask myself, why am I doing that and making my life more difficult in a way?
Yeah.
It's because we need these spaces of community and connection and collaboration. Somebody has to be doing that. It's a really important role to bring people together, to empower what's possible.
Totally right. Yeah. I mean, it is actually in a lot of ways what you're doing in a very similar sense. You had a longing for a certain type of community, and it wasn't there. And so you started to kind of build and orient around bringing that community together, because it was something that you were longing for. That those are also typically the most compelling types of solutions, whatever we want to call them in the market, is when it's something that the individual is craving for. They are their own customer or user. And then you can feel the authenticity of that solution. And I think it tends to do a lot better, which is why, we have a value. It's empathy builds empires. But when it comes to trying to solve these really hard challenges, I think it's impossible to do it as an outsider, and that you have to have real empathy for the nature of the challenge itself. And it's why our companies are headquartered in over 50 countries. They're on the ground. A lot of times the entrepreneur experience the challenge throughout their life that they're trying to solve for, whether that's prevention of honor killing in regions of Pakistan, or that is reintegration of former Liberian child soldiers, or that is working on education and farmer equality in East Africa. It's, the entrepreneurs lived the challenge that they're trying to solve for, similar to you, and I guess similar to me in that case, where we are our own customers, which also makes it more fun, because then you get a lot of benefit from starting it.
Yeah, totally. And people often ask, like, what can I do? Like, I don't know what to do in this world, like to find that space of purpose or to contribute more to all of the things that they find heartbreaking. And it's always like, well, what has your own life prepared you for? What have you experienced? And why have you experienced that? Like, what's the story in your ancestry? Like, where were you born? Like, what were you exposed to? What did life show you? What did life give you? And what can you kind of create from that?
Totally agree. And of course, not everybody can be, nor should everybody be entrepreneurs. You're doing our best to align or orient our lives around the things that we really care about. That can be as simple as, like, what do you vote for? What do you buy? Every dollar spent is a way of voting. What do you eat? Kind of all of those things as well. Because I think it's about trying to get closer and closer to integrity. That's a lifelong journey. That is never a destination, but getting closer and closer to it in all these different aspects. If you are an entrepreneur, that it's in the entrepreneuring, but there are a lot of different ways to do that.
Absolutely. I was telling you before we started recording a little bit about where this came from. And in the very first paragraph that I wrote about this, I wrote, we create the future by how we spend our time, energy, and money. And so it's really, how can we be connected to those choices? And I feel like, having witnessed so many entrepreneurs and having been an entrepreneur myself, entrepreneurs need a lot of support. And so not everyone needs to be one. It takes a village. Everything takes a village. I was thinking about that this morning in the shower, how we need a village for everything, whether it's raising a child or creating a project or standing up for an injustice. And so actually, if we can feel into what we're really inspired by, or what has our life shown us, it might not be that you have to quit your life and create a thing. It might be more find the people that already are and support them. Support them by buying the product, support them by investing in the product, support them by just, being kind to that human being that's feeling a bit tired.
Totally right. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And every vocation actually matters here. We talk about entrepreneurs, but what about teachers? They arguably have the most undervalued, most important role in many societies. Anybody's role in terms of their vocation matters, because it helps everything function. I do think we romanticize entrepreneurship. Obviously, that's all we focus on really at Unreasonable, but that's the place that we chose to focus. But it all kind of matters. So to your point, I love that you said time and energy and money, because I think time is actually our most expensive commodity. Oftentimes we just throw it around as if it was endless, but it's not. It's maybe our most valuable asset. And then energy is almost a dimension of time, but it really matters. Where are you putting your energy? Everybody has a role, whether it's the truck drivers or it's the nurses or it's the teachers or it's, the activists or it's the entrepreneurs or it's the politicians or it's the investors. Everybody has an active role to play in trying to get closer to integrity, but it's not to quit those jobs and try to do a startup. It's a really exciting story that then takes over headlines, but it's a really small portion of the occupations that are out there.
Totally. And it brings us back to the equity conversation when you mentioned teachers and nurses and all of these professions that we've really seen during the pandemic are the backbone of our society. And they had the most intense time during that period, and yet are really badly paid. And in this country, in the UK, they got the tiniest pay rise, a laughable pay rise, given the cost of living rises that have been happening here. And that's after being praised for, the selfless, amazing work that they do. So it feels like that's also part of
the absurdity.
It is.
You kidding? We one of the lowest paid jobs are teachers. Easily the most important job. It could be argued, right? Where we pay, especially publicly, is an indicator of what we're valuing. And I don't think there's a person who doesn't believe that teachers have one of the most important roles in society. It's not a person. So it's kind of absurd that we've ended up in this situation. And I think this kind of, for me, gets back to private influence over public policy instead of people influence over public policy.
Well, and if we abolished, say, private schools, then everybody would want schools to be better.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But because there's an alternative for those with money, it doesn't matter that the public schools aren't.
I've never thought of that, Amisha. That's a really interesting point. Really good point.
Yeah, because, if those individuals with a lot of privilege that want their kids to go on to do great things had to send their kids to really bad schools with really, really burnt out, exhausted, tired teachers, underpaid teachers, then they would probably want to change that.
Well, but the interesting thing is there's always unintended consequences. I agree with that line of thinking, but I also imagine that, let's say you banned private schools, then you'd probably just see way more gentrification and stratification of where people live, right? Because public schools, how they're currently funded, at least in the US, get funded by the tax dollars of the local community. And so that's why you have such discrepancy in public schools. It's insane, the discrepancy, at least in the US. So it would also require policy change around how schools are funded and how taxes move through that system. And then you would probably see what you're hoping to see.
Or just value teachers more.
Yeah, or just do that. Exactly.
Might be less complicated.
Yeah, that could be easy too. Exactly right. Yeah.
we are taking just a short pause here. If you are enjoying this episode, please consider joining our community. For a small contribution, you can be part of our beautiful online world, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and practice. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, and you receive a number of benefits, such as special member-only events and discounts on all our courses, retreats, and in-person experiences. You will have membership to our app and connect with inspiring humans around the world through a social network to discuss the themes of the show away from the eyes of advertisers and the manipulation of big tech. Our membership is what makes us able to stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And it is the very heart of all that we are. Head to www.allthatweare.org/support to find out more.
What is it that really supports you when you're feeling overwhelmed with either your workload or some of the issues that we've been discussing today?
Yeah, the issues tend to not overwhelm me, and that is because I think I do see the solution. So if anything, they'll like encourage me to dive in more, in essence, in different pockets of time. But certainly the last 2 years have been really hard. I am like really hard. It's the first time where I've felt tired when it comes to work. And it was actually Leticia, my wife, who had just got married. So it's funny to say that. And I kind of love it. So I might say it a lot. But, we were talking one evening and I was just like, so this gets to support. So she's a huge part of support. But I was saying like, wow, I'm just tired. Like I actually feel tired. I'm not working nearly as much as I used to, but I feel tired. There's a really cool quote. The poet David White, he said that the antidote to exhaustion isn't rest, it's wholeheartedness. And I think both are needed once again in different seasons. But that was the realization what I was actually missing in terms of the energy for the work that we do at Unreasonable was that connection to our community, because we hadn't been in person in 2 years. And actually, if you get back to the founding genesis, it was selfish. It was to seek refuge within that community. I was really missing that. And so I realized it was, so the question then became like, well, what gives that sense of wholeheartedness? And for me, it was, immersion in community with intentionality that is really strong around trying to solve meaningful problems. I'm so excited that we're actually going to be running our first in-person program again in June, because I think I energetically am very hungry for that. But so yeah, it definitely turned to Lay, I think, when things get hard, as well as the other entrepreneurs that we support in a really big way. Also have an amazing board of directors. I'm very lucky in that sense to have board members who will speak the truth, bluntly to me, but are also really supportive in doing so. That's another belief, is like feedback. Do we see that as something painful to give, or do we see it as a gift? Our board sees feedback as like a gift, and I receive it as a gift, even when it's hard. But that's really helpful. But it's also just to have this community of other entrepreneurs I can call and be like, am I crazy? Or like, how the hell did you solve that? Because I am in the thick of that, whatever that is. And it is immensely helpful. Sometimes there's not even a solution. It's just like, oh yeah, I've been there too. And you realize, okay, I'm not alone in that sense, which is immensely helpful when things get really hard. And I think it's really important to have people you can turn to and say, hey, have you been here before? What would you do in this situation? That to like share that perspective and that empathy is really important for me. I also have an amazing executive coach who I'm very fortunate to have. And there's a lot of people who I can lean to because of the nature of the community that we've built. But it'd be really hard without it. Really hard. Can I ask you actually, Amisha, just to spin the wheels a little bit, but what do you do? And like, where do you turn when you feel overwhelmed?
It depends on the day.
Yeah.
Sometimes I weep.
Yeah, good for you.
That's definitely something. I think the last 2 years have been really challenging. In my case, I've had like extra kind of family circumstances and things that have been a lot of grief. But I feel also just not doing the things that one normally does, and the in-person people stuff really makes a difference. Before the pandemic, I did all of these podcasts in person, which made it a really difficult game because it was like I had huge Trello boards and then just trying to like be in the same place at the same time as somebody. It was like a game to navigate. But for me, nature, spending time in nature has become the thing that's so important. Taking the dogs out and sitting by the trees, and community, you know, having a mentor or several mentors, people that I can talk to about what I'm holding, and friends and people with shared experiences. Actually, just on Saturday, I was at a really beautiful event for a space that's opening. I was tired and was about to go home, and then it just kind of got into this moment where there was 6 of us, all that hold a lot of space for other people. And we just all started laughing by the fire and like kind of talking about our intentions for the year and like this kind of new cycle with this eclipse energy and kind of what we want to call in. And it just felt like a big exhale.
Yeah,
like,
totally right.
To be kind of held in this circle of other people that are going through something similar. And so I feel like that's one of the things that I am committed to more of, like at this stage of the pandemic, is to find more community moments online and offline, because, you know, this is like a shared experience being a human. And so often we forget that.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. You actually just reminded me, I forgot a very important side, which is when things get overwhelmed too, doing the thing that personally gives you that kind of spaciousness. So for me, it's absolutely wild places as well, like getting out into nature, but sometimes just listening to your breath, like, or at least for me, or taking that moment right at the start of the interview. We do the same thing. We have a tradition or a ritual in Unreasonable, which is at the start of every meeting, it's 10 minutes, it's a moment of silence, and then an energy check to get grounded in the moment, because we just sporadically hop from one thing to the next so easily. I resonate with what you're saying.
What do you do as the energy check?
So it's really simple. It could be our board call for 4 hours. It could be a 10-minute, really quick one-on-one with someone. But we always start with a moment of silence. And you just, somebody in the group, you just kind of, they either call it or whoever's leading the meeting will assign someone and say, hey, Amisha, you want to break the moment of silence? You would hold that as long as you want. Could be one breath, could be 10, 20, like whatever that might be. And then you break it. And then you just check in on where's your energy at in that moment. And what we're hoping is that people can be sincere as well. So it's a habit that has us check in with ourselves, as well as hopefully disclose like authentically where we're at, so that everybody knows in that meeting kind of what energy we're all bringing into the session. Sometimes it takes 30 seconds, either then popcorn it around, so then you get to pick who shares their energy next. Sometimes it takes 30 seconds. Sometimes it takes 10 minutes. It just kind of depends. I do think rituals matter. Most of our waking life, maybe unfortunately, but is spent in work. And so how do you bring those things in that help bring out the best in ourselves, help at least, or try to, into the rhythm of work. But I love that you did that for the start of this call. It's the first podcast that I've seen someone do that. And I really enjoy it, like, very much.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think people are more used to it now, but I've definitely freaked out some people along the way. I agree with rituals. I feel like whenever I'm working through something big in my personal life, or, big, small, and also when I'm feeling a lot around certain issues, making an offering of some sort, lighting a candle, chanting some mantras, writing something, putting in a fire, all of these kinds of things really make a difference. And I was telling you, I've just moved to Somerset, and one of the amazing things about being here is the access to all of the beautiful nature, but also that there's a spring to go and collect like water from. And so just making a lot more of daily life into these sacred rituals of connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so important. It's probably one of the coolest and best investments of like time we can all make, is figure out which rituals speak to our souls. Take time to explore and find those, right? And they might feel really weird at first, and those that feel natural. But I think it's so important, so important. Unfortunately, the one place that really allows for that seems to be organized religion. But that's kind of almost like in modern society, it's almost the only place. That's why I say unfortunately. And so how do you, if you don't identify in that, or even if you do, bring it into your own rhythm of life? I think that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I made like a little kind of ebook once called Rituals for Wellbeing, and it's
No
something
way,
that
you
I
did?
share. Yeah, because I really feel like, I mean, rituals are a huge part of my path, and whether it's the ones that you do by yourself, and they can include like candles and spring water and fires and mantras and deities and all of this, but it doesn't have to be anything like that. For me, I've always been a big, just like a lover of bringing people together with a purpose and kind of creating rituals communally to celebrate things, to honor things, to mark occasions. And I always really enjoy like the little touches that make a gathering special in that way. I love the notion of how we can do rituals with our co-workers, with our romantic relationships. They offer such a powerful container to tend to everything that arises and that's present, and to the challenges and the fears, and as well as the possibility. Like, ritual really opens up that space for possibility.
You wrote a book on it. That's incredible. I'm going to check that out.
It's just a little ebook. Although I did write a book on intuition, and it has a lot of rituals and practices in it, because it's a gateway to connecting to those other aspects of ourselves that aren't the rational, intelligent side of us.
Analytical side. Yeah.
Yeah. And I see intuition really as a whole part of our intelligence. It's just a different language, and ritual is a really good language to awaken that part of our being.
So cool. Actually, for myself, I had to rebrand the word intuition, because I found that intuition sounds to people almost like, well, how could you make really big decisions off of intuition? That seems so haphazard or soft or whatever like language they might judge that with. So to actually convince my rational mind that I needed to listen to my intuition more, I rebranded it to faster intelligence, because I think that's what it is. It is the split-second intelligence that, as soon as you analyze it with your rational mind, you kind of destroy its ability to actually guide you. But when it really guides you, I think you make much smarter decisions. And so I'd love to read that book, because finding more space to be able to access this faster intelligence more easily or naturally is so important, so unbelievably important.
I love that. I never thought of it as being faster, but it is.
It's way faster. And the problem is, as soon as you analyze it, you kill it. You start to be like, oh, maybe actually that's crazy. You start to judge it.
Because when I was asked to write that book about intuition, I could have taken it down a more like supernatural kind of witchy sort of way. And I was just sitting with it being like, what would be the most useful thing to share? And then the words that landed were, intuition is a part of our intelligence that we're not using. So when we're talking about possibility, imagine if we actually just used the possibility that already exists within us.
Totally right. Yeah.
We're just not using half of our intelligence as individuals, as a society. Like, we don't value it. And so I actually really believe that a lot of the answers that we're looking for, like, we have them. It's just that we're not listening to that part of ourselves. And you must find this with all the entrepreneurs that you support, that so much of what they are bringing comes from that intuition.
Deep down inside, yes.
Yeah.
It's a sense of knowing when you shouldn't be able to know, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the craziness of a lot of entrepreneurs in that sense, especially the ones we're supporting, tend to be very tapped into their intuition. And that's what gives them permission to do something that hasn't been done, or to try to solve an angle of a problem that's never been solved before. I think that's exactly right.
And the confidence, because it's like you can feel it in your body that you're onto something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like an embodied experience. And I also think, that's funny you mentioned confidence. Confidence is really needed. That's why I say, like, we support entrepreneurs who are foolhardy enough to believe they can put a dent on the world's hardest problems or seemingly intractable problems. But in equal weight, I think confidence needs to be matched by humility too, and an acknowledgement that, like, the greatness of what we achieve is through the strength of the relationships that we have, and that your first solution, although it might have worked in terms of an entrepreneur at a certain level of scale, it probably is not the right one to get to that next level. It's this constant reinvention, and that the greatest ideas, some will come from intuition, but most will come from your team if you're doing a great job, right? Over time. Yeah.
And I feel that actually living in relationship with your intuition is also living in relationship with your humility, because
exactly
your intuition is not
right.
going to say the exact same thing the whole time because it's not fixed. And your intuition is also going to tell you like, oh, you know, that team member that's suggesting that thing. And even though it basically means that all that work that you did for that whole 2-week period is just going to be thrown away because they're right. Like,
Yeah, but they're right.
You know
Yeah.
they're right.
That's an interesting point. It's like how, as you know, those anybody who's listening who manages people in one function or another, or even like a parent, how do you actually create the conditions for those you're either leading or caring for to access their intuition more quickly? You know, and in terms of a company, would a company outperform if it created the space for its teammates to access intuition and to act on intuition? And I think the answer would be probably a resounding yes. That's a cool thing to explore, how to create a culture upon which people have permission and some tools, right? And it's kind of this skill as well to access that fast, to make decisions off of their faster intelligence.
Yeah, let's explore that, Daniel. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, I'm intrigued too. I have no idea.
I know your call to action for everyone listening is the Unreasonable Collective. Can you tell us a bit more about what that is?
Yes. And it plays into your questions around equity. I should have highlighted that earlier. We have a teammate at Unreasonable. She's our managing director. Her name's Pratibha. Her background was entrepreneurship, investing, investment banking in the finance world, a lot of it. In her role at Unreasonable as our MD was making a lot of introductions to a lot of investors. We work with about 1,000 sources of capital that will connect our entrepreneurs to if they need financing, and whether that's grant or debt or equity, whatever it is. And she, in essence, called me one day and said, you know, she's an angel investor herself. So she was like, I'm passing the most compelling investment opportunities I've ever seen to the likes of, you know, Sequoia or Blackstone or BlackRock, these huge financial institutions. And she, in essence, asked the question, right? Her intuition spoke up and said, why can't people like me invest in these solutions? And in her case, people like her, you know, she's an immigrant, born and raised in India, came over to the US. She's a woman of color. She's a working mom. She's not a billionaire, right? And so why can't people like her or you or I be able to invest in these types of solutions that are making the world we want to see and are phenomenal investment opportunities? You know, in large part is because, one, we don't have access to it. We're not on the speed dials of the billionaires who do necessarily. But two, we just can't afford the minimums. You have to be extremely wealthy to be able to afford a $5 million investment into a high risk kind of venture. And so the collective was the solution that Pratibha came up with. And it's a form of community driven investment. And so we have about 200 members now. We launched it about a year ago. And these are individuals who want to be able to, with their dollars, participate in building that future that they want to see and have access to also just amazing investment opportunities. And they pool their capital. You know, example, the first company that we invested into was Aerofarms. That's the company that Dr. Lisa Dyson, former NASA scientist, took a technology from NASA where you can convert carbon dioxide into protein. And she's literally making chicken out of carbon dioxide and many other products. It'd be very hard for us to be able to invest, but as a community, we can. Right. So we can come to the collective members and present that opportunity. And then let's say 50 or 60 of them actually invest. And they might put $10,000 in a part of a much larger round. But it's amazing because then the entrepreneur, it's really beneficial for them because they get one entity on their cap table, right, and invest in their company legally, which is unreasonable, but they get the benefit of these 50 or 60 individuals who now really care about their success. And so that's what we call it, community-driven investment, because now, and then we create opportunities for them to actually support the growth of that investment that they made into something they believe in. An important angle to this is changing the demographics of financing. So part of that is who gets to invest. So we made a commitment at the onset that at least half our members are women or identify as people of color in one way or another. Same thing for all the investments that we place into the leadership teams, the demographics of the CEOs that we support. And we really want to change both supply and demand for investment into startups. So that's the idea. It's just unreasonablecollective.com. You know, there's a little bit of a wait list, but anybody can read all about the details there and then fill in that form. And if you mention that you heard about it from this conversation, we will accelerate that conversation with you. But we're really just trying to demystify and give access to being able to participate in these like hugely exciting investment opportunities that we normally wouldn't be able to as individuals. And like I never could, even as the CEO of Unreasonable, I could never invest because I could never afford it. You know, I would go to our companies and be like, hey, can I put just about $10,000 or $5,000 into this? And they would say, well, no, like it's just too complicated for that amount of value. But now I can, and our teammates can, and our community can, which is pretty exciting.
I love the way that you talk about the excitement of being able to be an investor, because I'm not a billionaire.
Yeah, me too.
Able to invest. So I've always seen it as more like the investors are doing you a favor, but actually the way that you talk about it, there's a joy to being an investor.
Oh my gosh. Well, when it's into solutions that you desperately believe in, right, that you want to see uptake in the market and become the new status quo. And when it's into solutions that also, if they do succeed in that, will actually far outperform financially as well. I think it's a huge gift to have the opportunity to become a part of the solutions, at the invitation of the entrepreneurs. Changing that relationship to investment in the startup world is also really important. There's a huge power dynamic normally. And in our case, we are remarkably grateful that we get the opportunity to get allocations into these companies for our members to be able to invest, because they wouldn't normally have access to it.
And most of the things that you support at Unreasonable, like tech-based?
Not necessarily, but what we do look at scale is a huge part of it. So oftentimes there's a technical component to it, but a lot of them are very human intensive. So, Greenlight Planet would be a good example. They bring distributed solar to about 80 million people right now, mostly in India, who didn't have electricity prior to getting their solar units. They have a workforce of almost 20,000 people who go around into very rural environments across the region. They're also in East Africa now too, and knock on front doors and say, hey, you're using kerosene, to light your house. How would you like to have modern solar at a price that's less than kerosene? So it's very human intensive, but they also have, the entire supply chain of making that product of the solar panel and the battery system and so on. But that's not heavy tech. Solar panels already exist. The hard part is innovating on the business model and actually being able to access customers. And so that's really human intensive. Whereas, something like air protein is very technology intensive to convert CO2 into protein in essence. So it kind of depends. As to we have both very advanced technological solutions and we have very simple tech solutions, no matter what they're innovating, but the innovation could very well be the business model, not the technology itself.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been a really inspiring conversation. How would you like people to connect with you more or find out more about Unreasonable?
So our website is just unreasonablegroup.com. And in there is a contact form that is typically the best, because we will, depending on why you want to reach out, we'll channel you to the right teammate in that sense. And in there as well, there's a way to get in touch with me if you want to as well. You can just specify that, and then it'll go through the systems, and then I'll respond. I think that's the best way to do it, honestly. But just unreasonablegroup.com, and all the information about the collective is there as well, and all our programs. You can also explore every company that we support. You can filter by impact or region or anything like that, and dive into their stories, and also the roles that they're hiring for as well. We have all of that available online, because we want to give people the ability to become a part of the solution if they want to join up in one way or another with the entrepreneurs we're supporting.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Amisha. It's been really fun, very grounding. It was great. I appreciate what you're doing here and the community you're bringing together. I think it's special. I think it's unique.
Thank you for listening and spending your time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. For less than a tea or coffee a day, you can access our community conversations and benefits such as our app and member gatherings, as well as being a patron whose support makes this podcast happen. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others find us. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.